When a dismissive, avoidant and you both stop contacting each other, this is what happens next. When a dismissive avoidant and you both stop contacting each other, what follows is not just distance, it's a psychological unfolding that reveals the emotional truth beneath the relationship. What begins as silence soon becomes a mirror, reflecting fear, longing, self-protection, and ultimately, transformation. This is not simply a story of no contact. It's a study of what happens when two wounded attachment systems, one anxious, one avoidant, finally stop dancing around their fears and face themselves. The collapse of the pursue-withdraw cycle. At first, silence feels like the end. The calls stop. The texts fade. The push and pull pattern that once gave both of you a strange sense of familiarity dissolves into nothingness. For the dismissive avoidant, this quiet feels like relief. They've escaped the emotional intensity that triggers their old wounds. The feeling of being needed, demanded, or exposed. For them, distance equals safety. For you, however, the silence often feels like loss. You feel the ache of missing them, the habitual urge to reach out, the emptiness of an unfinished story. But then, something shifts. The silence stops being punishment, and starts being clarity. You begin to see how much emotional energy you were investing in keeping something alive that was never reciprocal. That realization marks the beginning of emotional detachment, the seed of personal power. The avoidant's initial relief turns to unease. Dismissive avoidants often tell themselves, "I don't need anyone." Their emotional independence isn't strength, it's protection. A wall built to prevent the pain of vulnerability and rejection. When you stop reaching out, the avoidant's sense of control cracks. At first, they feel lighter, no messages, no pressure, no expectations. But after some time, that relief transforms into curiosity, and then discomfort. Why aren't they chasing me anymore? They start to notice your absence not as silence, but as a void that reflects their own disconnection. The silence they used to hide behind now starts echoing back at them. The shift in power and emotional energy. When you stop contacting the avoidant, the power dynamic reverses. They were once in control, the one who could retreat and know you'd always return. Now, the script changes. Your silence becomes energetic withdrawal. Even without a word, the avoidant can feel that your emotional cord is no longer feeding them validation. This triggers their deepest fear, abandonment. The very fear they spent years denying now begins to surface, not as sadness, but as confusion and restlessness. That's when you might see subtle moves. They watch your stories. Like an old post. Send a random meme or emoji. These aren't random actions, they are emotional probes, tiny tests to see if you still care. But they won't risk direct vulnerability, because that would expose the very emotions they're terrified of. Your emotional transformation through silence. For you, the first stage of no contact is usually pain. You crave closure, you want answers, and your mind replays every detail. But then, as weeks pass, the silence becomes something else entirely, self-respect. You begin to understand that not reaching out isn't a tactic, it's healing. You're not avoiding them to manipulate, you're protecting your peace. Silence isn't rejection, it's reclamation. You start to rebuild your energy, redirect your focus, and realize that closure doesn't come from them, it comes from you. The avoidant's inner conflict. Meanwhile, the avoidant's detachment begins to collapse under its own weight. They start feeling something they rarely admit, loneliness. At night, when distractions fade, their mind drifts back to you. Your laughter, your patience, the feeling of emotional safety they once took for granted. They remember, not because they're ready to reconnect, but because they're finally feeling what they once avoided, the cost of emotional distance. Some may reach out with subtle breadcrumbs. Others double down, diving into work, new partners, or endless distractions to drown the silence. But deep down, they know, no distraction can replace real connection. The moment of return, or recognition, months later, the avoidant might reappear. A casual, "Hey, how have you been?" A random message that carries unspoken emotional weight. It's not really about small talk. It's about testing the door. They want to see if the emotional bond, the safety they once rejected, still exists. But by this stage, you've changed. You respond from a healed space, not an anxious one. Their charm no longer disarms you. Their distance no longer confuses you. You now see clearly. Love cannot thrive where fear still rules. The real meaning of silence. Here lies the paradox. Your silence affects the dismissive avoidant more deeply than any message you could send. Not because it punishes them, but because it's no longer about them. It's about you choosing peace over pain. The moment your silence comes from self-respect, not strategy, you win. For the avoidant, this becomes a mirror moment. They begin to see their own patterns, why they equate intimacy with suffocation, why they push away love, and why they fear the very thing they desire most, connection. Some will start to heal. Others will retreat even further. But in both cases, your silence becomes their mirror, and your growth becomes your power. The final truth. Who grows through the silence? When both of you stop contacting each other, the outcome isn't about who breaks the silence first. It's about who grows through it. You begin awakening to your self-worth and emotional independence. They confront their fear of love and vulnerability. Sometimes the silence leads to reconciliation, but only when both have evolved. More often, it becomes a sacred ending, a quiet closure that frees you both. Because silence doesn't destroy connections. It reveals which ones were strong enough to survive without chasing. Closing reflection. If you're in that silent space right now, unsure, restless, hoping they'll reach out, remember this. Silence is not the absence of communication, it's the presence of truth. It shows who can sit with discomfort, who can grow through emptiness, and who still needs to fill it with noise. And when you finally stop reaching out, not as a game, but as an act of self-love, you reclaim the one connection that truly matters, the one you have with yourself.